With IEMs flooding the market every month, it's near impossible to feel like you have a full understanding of what might be your best option. I can't make that process any easier, especially now with Kiwi ears dropping another new IEM. This is the Quintet. It costs $220. Kiwi Ears was kind enough to send me this IEM to review. Let's see what it has to offer. The Quintet is a hybrid IEM using one dynamic, two balanced armature, one planar, and one piezoelectric driver in each housing. That's an interesting conglomeration of various driver designs shoved into a casing. Kiwi Ear says that this combination delivers extremely high-resolution audio comparable to professional studio monitors. They promise impactful bass due to the 10mm dynamic driver. Finally, the company says that the mids are, quote, natural and resolving, whatever any of this is supposed to mean. The marketing is pretty robust, particularly about the drivers having one kind or another influence on the sound. The takeaway is that this IEM seems, according to the marketing, to be aimed at a U or V-shaped curve. There's a lot of marketing blurb about bass and airiness, things that generally signal to me a preference towards the extremes of the frequency range. But Kiwi Ear says that this is instead a balanced signature, where, quote, monitor-like neutrality is on the upper mids and is retained. Of course, studio monitors vary in design and sound, so without a baseline idea of which specific studio monitors we should be comparing the Quintet against, this really doesn't help much in respect to what the sound signature is supposed to be like. As for build, look, Kiwi Ears did not reinvent the wheel. This IEM looks a lot like the plethora of other IEMs in the market. The upper shell casing is metal that is etched with the logo and model of the IEM. The bulk of the enclosure, however, is plastic. This means that the Quintet is fairly light and should not create a downward drag to its weight. I cannot find any fault with the physical design. It works, and frankly, it works well. Naturally, every ear is a little different, so just because it might fit one person's ear does not mean somebody else will have exactly the same experience. Kiwi Ears provides a handful of silicone ear tips and a rubber-coated 2-pin cable. The ear tips are fairly generic, and for the price of this IEM, I would have hoped for something a little bit more unique. The cable is perfectly fine, but keep in mind that it will transmit microphonics when rubbed against surfaces. The rubber sheathing on these kinds of cables sadly contributes a lot to that microphonic nature. Overall, the Quintet has an interesting amalgam of drivers, and I was rather curious to figure out what the sound signature would in fact be. The overall design and accessories are perfectly fine, though we have in the past seen more luxury around this price, if not a little bit cheaper. I tested the Quintet for over 1 month as one of my go-to IEMs. I paired it with my EcoZerta ITM03, Low-2-Paw S1, Low-2-Paw 6000, Matrix Mini-I Pro 3, the Ibasso DX80, and directly into audio jacks of those devices that still have them. I listened to my standard lossless FLAC test playlist, streamed lossless music on Amazon Music, lossy content on Spotify and YouTube, and consumed a wide variety of other material including movies and TV shows. I conducted A/B comparisons against the Moondrop Starfield and Aria, as well as against the Tin Hi-Fi T2. The Quintet's bass is marginally elevated. Sub-bass seems to get a 2 to 3 decibel boost. This seemed fairly obvious in Mountains by Hans Zimmer. That track has low sub-bass rumble from the start. The Quintet let me hear that detail from the moment the track started. That rumble was persistent throughout the track, but did not overwhelm the other elements. For instance, when the crescendo hits at the middle of the song, the rumble did not drown out the various other instruments in the track. Bass transients was marginally quick, perhaps maybe slightly faster than on typical dynamic driver designs, but not anywhere nearly as fast as with planar magnetic drivers. There's some melding between sub-bass and mid-bass. Drum strikes are hard but not sharp. Imagine a strong thud instead of a thwack. Kind of like a drummer playing with a thin sheet draped over the drum head. Tracks with various drums, such as with Irodori by Kodo, came out quite clearly. I had no trouble hearing the different tonalities and decays of the drums in that particular type of song. Compared to the aria and Starfield, the Quintet has a cleaner, less bloated bass. The Moondrop products tend to lose more bass detail, have greater melding of sub-bass and mid-bass. Sub-bass, however, seems to be marginally more obvious on the Quintet. The T2 has a far clearer, much less present bass frequency, which is not a surprise. There's a significant bass fall-off, which makes sub-bass frequencies much more difficult to hear without pumping volume or getting perfect seal in the ear, and then also applying EQ on top. Regardless, transients is quite fast on the T2. Drum impacts are a bit sharper on the T2 compared to all the other IEMs I tested here. I would say that the Quintet has an interesting middle ground between the Moondrop IEMs and the T2. As for mids, the Quintet has a very obvious vocal push. Sibilants and vocal grain get shoved into the ears like a scalpel into skin. In Orla Gartland's Why Am I Like This, the Quintet rendered her sibilants probably 5 to 7 decibels emphasized over a neutral rendition. I compared against the Moondrop Quarks, the most neutral IEMs I have, and confirmed that at least that was my impression. On the other hand, Orla's voice was patently clear throughout the track, even when all the instruments played at once. In Want You Back by Haim, the Quintet again emphasized the sibilants, similar to what I heard on Orla Gartland's music. The 3 vocalists in Want You Back were, however, very clear on the Quintet. I could pick out their placement and individual tonalities. When the instruments played at maximum, I could still make out those various vocalities in the background. In comparison, the aria and Starfield do also emphasize sibilants, but not to the same degree as the Quintet. There's probably a 3 decibel difference in this regard, with the Moondrop IEMs having a gentler presentation in comparison. Vocals and mid-centric clarity overall is much more obvious on the Quintet. There's more bass bleed into the mids on the Moondrop IEMs. The T2 had a similar presentation as the Quintet. The T2 also emphasizes vocal sibilants and grain, and it was a bit difficult for me to tell the T2 and Quintet apart in at least this regard. Mid-centric clarity is marginally more obvious on the T2. Vocals stand out a little bit more on the T2. The Quintet's treble has an emphasis in low treble and a marginal emphasis in the mid treble, and then a gentle downward slope in the upper treble. This design makes the brass and horn stand out in a mix, and sometimes a little bit sharply. Group sets in an orchestral mix might get pushed into the background whenever flutes or clarinets or saxophones or horns are played with gusto. Having said that, I never really felt that any of these instruments were being overly sharp or harsh to my ears. The aria and Starfield in comparison have a similar but not the same sound as the Quintet. The Moondrop IEMs have a mid-treble emphasis that is a little bit greater than what I heard in the Quintet. All 3 of these IEMs have a fairly comparable upper treble roll-off. Clarity in the treble region is markedly more obvious on the Quintet. The T2's treble is a little bit more bright than that of the Quintet. The difference really seems to be in the upper treble, where the T2 is either closer to neutral or a bit above, while the Quintet, as I said before, has a little bit of a reduction. Clarity in this region is basically a toss-up. Soundstage on the Quintet is above average. It is wider than the Moondrop IEMs, but not quite as wide as that of the T2. Changing ear tips might alter this impression a little bit. As for detail, well, I thought the Quintet did a reasonably good job in rendering obvious and subtle details in every track I tested. Pops and sizzles, electric buzzing effects, creaking of wood, sharp intakes of breath, multiple vocalists, twice of guitar strings, wind in the background of ambient tracks. All of this was clear and consistent on the Quintet. In my new light footstep test, the Quintet rendered 7 to 8 clear footsteps. The Quintet's bass made the footsteps less clear or ultimately drowned out in the track, where I think had the bass been a little bit more controlled or more recessed, those footsteps would have been greater. The aria and Starfield presented 6 to 7 footsteps, while the T2 rendered 9. My initial impression upon reading the marketing was that the Quintet has a V or U-shaped signature. I think it does in fact have a U-shaped signature, with vocals getting a huge boost. Bass on the Quintet is, in my view, very tasteful without getting bloated or muddy. The treble might be a little or a lot brighter than some would prefer. Those who are treble sensitive should not reach for this IM because I think you're going to gripe about it. The mids is really where this IM shines, or falls, depending on your outlook. I'm not sure I'd call this presentation natural, since I really don't think I've ever sat in a live venue and heard vocals emphasized like I do on hi-fi tunings. I'm sorry, but it has not been my personal experience. Nor do I think that the Quintet is a neutral signature. I'm not a speaker guy, so I don't know which monitors might come close to the Quintet's sound. I'm sure there's something out there that matches the general frequency of the Quintet. But in my mind, neutral does have a definition, and that's something like the Quarks. And quite frankly, that's not what I hear on the Quintet. Ultimately, I think the Quintet is an interesting experiment with multiple drivers. It's not the first time we've seen this. Now, I don't know if it does anything particularly different from some of the multitude of other IEMs we already have in the market, but if you feel like you want to try a 5-driver design and the budget fits your wallet, then I think the Quintet would be a good IEM for you. Just keep in mind about the sound signature. Anybody who does not like treble would very likely find this IEM uncomfortable. For people who like that airiness or sparkle or vocal presentation, then the Quintet might actually be a very nice IEM that provides the vocal boost and at the same time a nice bass boost that doesn't get bloated.